Starting in January, mailboxes everywhere will have something to sing and dance about, because that's when Crocker Bank's interest checking statements will show the extra money earned in Crocker's new interest checking accounts. That's right, a new service that pays interest on your checking account. Not even savings and loans can pay you more. So come on in to Crocker and sign up now. Your bank statement won't have pleased you or your mailbox this much in a long time.
Since 1993, the Employment Lawyers Group has been a results-oriented law firm whose goal is to get the client what they deserve. They've represented thousands of California employees who've lost their jobs, been sexually harassed, subjected to employment discrimination, or were owed wages on an individualized or group basis, such as a class action. They have a high rate of success. There are few situations involving employment law that they have not confronted. At the forefront of employee rights, they're often the first employee law firm to confront a new legal issue. For an experienced employment lawyer, call 877-525-0700. That's 877-525-0700. They have call takers standing by. Online, read more about the firm at employeelawca.com. They have offices throughout Southern California. Make your work problem theirs to solve.
Does anybody remember Crocker Bank? Well, I do, and that's going to be our segue on the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show to what we're talking about next. We're going to talk about a man that I think without him, we wouldn't have Los Angeles. And there are only a couple people I can say that about. Very, very few. And I don't know how many of you have heard of this guy named Mr. Hellman. First name Isaias, Isaias. Well, he didn't land in Los Angeles until 1859. It's a long time ago. He was born in 1842 in Bavaria. He was Jewish. Maybe that's why a lot of people haven't heard about him. A steamer brought him and his brother Hellman to San Pedro in 1859, but Penis Banning's barge brought them to shore. Penis Bang, what is this, Remus Helms? Penis Banning, well, that's his name. You've heard of Banning, California. If there was no Mr. Banning and his silver mines, that's the other one I gotta tell you. I don't think there'd be a Los Angeles, because Los Angeles served basically as the supply station for these silver mines all the way out in Banning, California. And without that, we wouldn't have had stores. We wouldn't be selling anything. So he's actually very important. But, he just had a barge that brought Mr. Hellman and his brother to San Pedro. And 2 hours later, at the cost of $20 in 1859, a Conestoga wagon delivered Hellman and Isaias to the Pueblo, which is the city, which is Los Angeles, where we know it now by Alvaro Street. In 1859, there were 4,000 accounted for residents in Los Angeles. Imagine coming into town in 1859, Los Angeles. Probably there were mud huts back there in the Pueblo. Banning took a liking to Isaias, who was learning to speak English, and invited him to stay in his home. Oh, I'd like to be there. Still, in 1859, Isaias began sleeping on a cot in his cousin's store while learning the dry goods business. By 1865, he had considerably improved his cousin's store while becoming fluent in English and Spanish. If you didn't speak Spanish in Los Angeles in 1865, I think you had a problem. Kind of the same now. Well, that year, 1865, that's the end of the Civil War, Isaias paid $525 for a dry goods store on Commercial and Main Street. He put another $1,000 into upgrading the store. Although many of the upgrades were lavish for a frontier town, which was Los Angeles, one upgrade changed history. Isaias Hellman invested $160, that was a lot of money then, for a Tilden and McFarland safe, which he placed on the counter to demonstrate stability. This is a technique this man used throughout his life very effectively. The dry goods store also had a scale to measure gold dust and nuggets that were coming in. Now, Isaiah soon began allowing Angelenos to store gold and other valuables in his safe. Safety deposit boxes and banks did not exist yet in Los Angeles. By 1867, Isaias Hellman's safe in his little dry goods store contained $200,000. That would be $32 million today. Some of this money belonged to people like Miguel Lennis. Have you heard of the Lennis abode in the valley? William Workman. Have you heard of the Workman Ranch? Now, David Workman was a judge. I had one of my first jury trials in front of him. He was a descendant, and he died very recently. At any rate, Isaias' safe was particularly handy because the only other option was to use Wells Fargo to ship gold coin by stage to San Francisco. This cost money, posed risk, and led to long delays in order to get one's money back. Isaias didn't impose any charge for the use of his safe. We're talking 1867, people. Things changed when an irate Irish miner who regularly kept his money in the safe and made withdrawals came to withdraw the last of his money. And I'm going to say it, and I can say it because this is me. The miner called Isaias a dirty Jew, something we don't like to be called. I don't know how often that happened in 1867, but I bet it did. He accused Isaias of stealing his gold, and he lunged at him. A friend calmed down the miner by reminding him he used his money to gamble and drink. But Isaias decided he'd have to set up formal banking functions. He went to the printer and ordered deposit and withdrawal slips labeled I.W. Hellman Banker and became the first banker of Los Angeles. And I'm not going to say that other people were actually bankers before him in Los Angeles because I think he was the first. Now, former Governor John Downey opened the first official bank of Los Angeles in 1868, shortly before Isaias officially opened a bank in Los Angeles, but I don't think it had $32 million in it, and you're going to hear more about Downey in this episode 108 of the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show, where tonight we're talking about Los Angeles history and very few men who made Los Angeles, and without them, we would not have Los Angeles. So in 1867, Herman Hellman, remember the brother who came with Isaias, he dropped the N on his name, and he became Hellman, not Hellman, and he opened his own shop, which today goes by Smart and Final, if you've ever heard of that. By 1867, Isaias was one of the 30 richest Angelenos, and he wasn't very old then. You can do the math. He was 25 years old. In 1868, his bank moved out of his store and into a partnership called Hellman, Temple and Company. By this time, Temple, as in the Temple Street, maybe you've heard of where Court is. He was married to Workman's daughter, and the bank's customers included, get ready for this, Don Pio Pico, California's first governor, Diego Sepulveda. Yeah, he's a member of the Sepulveda family who owned a large portion of Santa Ana and Costa Mesa. So everyone's really doing business at Isaias' bank. Now, Isaias becomes a land speculator like everyone in Los Angeles did for many years, and I think still does. In 1863, he bought his first lot in the outskirts of town, which was Hope and 7th Street. Hope Street seems to have some pretty tall buildings on it now. I don't think that's the outskirts anymore. By 1869, he was involved in most of the large-scale land purchases in Los Angeles as either a lender or a purchaser. This guy is pretty damn young by then, okay? Keep in mind, too, he's not even 30. Around this time, he bought the first vineyard of his near the Los Angeles River, and by turn of the century, he sat on the California Wine Board. A two-story building Isaias erected in 1870 can be seen if you check out vintagelosangeles.org or employeelawca.com/vintage-LA, all one word. All right, so in 1868, Hellman, Temple and Company was opened in a small building left of the Bella Union Hotel. So he's got to operate a bank, but he's not able to be in charge of it because he's Jewish. And there'd be too many anti-Semitic things said, I suppose. So the story with Isaias goes on. In 1870, he marries Esther, whose older sister was married to Meyer Lehman, a Bavarian cotton grower who started a firm called Lehman Brothers. Have you ever heard of them? Okay, so in 1871, Isaias recruited John Downey to form Farmers and Merchants Bank. And although Isaias ran the bank, Downey was the official president because Isaias feared there'd be outlash if the figurehead of the bank was Jewish. And Downey was incompetent, by the way. He just loaned money to everyone, and he didn't know how to do it. And our star here, Isaias Hellman, did. And you're going to hear more about who he loaned money to. But by 1871, he's instrumental in funding Los Angeles' first gas, electric, and water companies. And his wife, Esther, becomes involved in the Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Society, which raised money for Los Angeles' first synagogue in 1872. We heard about Newmark a couple minutes ago on this show. This synagogue may have been the first Reformed temple in California. Rabbi Edelman allowed men and women to sit together while some of their prayers were in English, neither of which is allowed during traditional Jewish prayer. If you've ever been to an Orthodox temple, men and women do not sit together, and the women sit behind curtains. So pretty important that he's involved in this too. By 1872, Isaias worked with Leland Stanford. Have you heard of him? He was going to make sure the Southern Pacific Railroad came through Los Angeles and not San Diego. And Leland Stanford is Stanford University, if you didn't know, and he is the railroad. So, wasn't for Isaias. I don't think the railroad would have come through Los Angeles. It would have gone to San Diego. And there was a lot going on during this time about ports and whether San Diego would become the big city or LA would. So a similar situation with the port occurs in which many Los Angeles historians credit the rise to the port being here in San Pedro and Long Beach area, Wilmington, and not San Diego. And our income from the port in Los Angeles is enormous, and as a workplace lawyer, that's a big deal. I represent a lot of people that work for the Chevron refineries and the ports and all that in the area. In 1875, Isaias developed the dominant trolley system in Los Angeles, which allowed the city to spread out. Remember westward expansion? The same year, he bought out a place called Rancho Cucamonga. Have you heard of that? Yeah, it's in San Bernardino, and I guess in the 30s or 40s, Jack Benny was making jokes about that, but now that's a big city in the Inland Empire, not very far from the Ontario office of the Employment Lawyers Group. In 1875, there was a run on the Bank of California in San Francisco due to a decline in the silver industry. Silver, Penis Banning, yes, his silver mines, and all that stuff about whether we're going to have silver, gold. Well, anyways, there was also a lot of land speculation in California. There was a panic in the east. This caused a run on Isaias's bank and its closure for 4 days. But Meyer Lehman of Lehman Brothers wired Isaias $20,000, which he turned into gold and stacked up on the counters of his bank to demonstrate they were solvent. And future withdrawals did not happen in Isaias's bank with the gold on the counters. The only other bank in Los Angeles went out of business, and a financial disaster in Los Angeles was diverted by Isaias Hellman. Sensing the movement of the city in 1876, Isaias purchased thousands of acres in southwest Los Angeles. In 1879, Methodists were looking for land to use for their new university. Isaias donated the land, upon which the University of Southern California opened in 1880. California's governor was so impressed with Isaias' donation, he made Isaias a regent of the University of California. In 1878, he became a one-third owner in Rancho Los Alamitos, which happened to include Signal Hill. Now, that's where all the oil is near Long Beach. And it's a pretty large oil producer. He'd also purchased the Rancho San Pedro. Well, that's where the port is now, isn't it? In 1883, Hardison and Stewart owed considerable amount of debt to others, and they were looking for oil, and they had not hit a gusher. And there were $183,000 in debt back in 1883. So I told you Isaias was a pretty good foreseer of who could pay their loans back. He made these two gentlemen a $10,000 loan. Hardison and Stewart is known today as Unical. Have you heard of Union of 76? In 1882, Isaias loans Mr. Otis $18,000 to buy out a certain Los Angeles newspaper called The Times. Otis and his son-in-law, Harry Chandler, are the third men that I would credit as being, without them, there is no Los Angeles as we know it. They were the boosters of Los Angeles for years. They were members of the original syndicate, which owned the San Fernando Valley and made the land sale in 1911. And we know the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion comes from a Chandler, but she's really, I think, Buffum Chandler. She's married. But that's our music center. That's our first one. Gotta put the Chandlers in as being there. But and back to Isaias Hellman, who, seriously, without him, there would be no West. In 1890, he moves to San Francisco. Lucky Baldwin, who we talked about earlier in the show, is up there too sometimes. Some of these guys go back and forth. Well, Isaias takes over the Bank of Nevada, followed by the Union Trust Company in 1893. In 1893, he prevented financial ruin in both Los Angeles and San Francisco by stocking gold coins on the counters of the banks where he kept larger reserves than others. Although he relocates to San Francisco, he maintains significant interest in Los Angeles. In 1893, he loaned a gentleman named Mr. Doheny, his new partner, $500 to find oil lurking underneath Los Angeles. This is Mr. Doheny, as in the Doheny Estates in Beverly Hills, as one of the major oil magnates. So this guy now is pretty much loaning money to anyone that became anything in oil. In 1893, he provides a $50,000 loan to build the breakwall for the creation of the San Pedro Harbor. Again, how much of our economy is based on that? Pretty big. Bradley wanted us to become a major port city. Barry went to my law school, and that's when Los Angeles changed its demeanor from being just a nice big city that was mostly white to being an international city, and the port continues to be a major reason why Los Angeles is a world-class city, by the way. So in 1898, Isaias Hellman establishes the Los Angeles Railway with Henry Edwards Huntington. Maybe you've heard of him. Huntington, as in a little museum they have down there, San Marino, that is. In 1901, the two established the Pacific Electric Railway, which ultimately spanned from downtown Los Angeles to the sea and served as the streetcar company in Los Angeles. Esther died in 1908. Now, I wanted to have music that is real music from the era. And this song. Well, it's baseball season and nobody's playing baseball right now. But that song came out in 1908. That's when Isaias Hellman's beloved Esther died. And remember that they had some cousins on her side with Lehman of the Lehman Brothers. But Isaias dies in 1920. And at different times, the couple's son and grandson became the president of Wells Fargo Bank. And I think you heard a little bit about Crocker Bank on our commercial. All of these banks of his, Wells Fargo, Nevada National Bank, Union Trust, they all became Wells Fargo. And the Farmers and National Bank, which was his first, became Security Pacific, which I remember living in Los Angeles. That got bought out by Bank of America. And some speculate there's been a lack of interest in Isaias Hellman because he was Jewish. And notwithstanding his importance in Los Angeles, California, and San Francisco, little has been written about him. There's a great book one of his ancestors wrote called Towers of Gold. You should read it. I did. And to some extent, he was in the right place at the right time. But I don't think somebody else could have made loans to Union Oil to save them so they could become Union Oil. And all the things he did, just, it's unbelievable. And there's so much more that I didn't even tell you about. And I guess he was a good banker. And he wasn't the banker that was making these usurious loans to those people with the Spanish land grants. He wasn't doing that. Those were some other bankers that weren't real bankers or just not very scrupulous. So that wasn't how he got rich. He got rich with knowing who to loan money to, which is a talent that not everybody has. All right, you're listening to the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show. I'm Karl Gerber. I'm a real workplace lawyer. Tonight we've talked a lot about Los Angeles history. I did want to play a couple other songs for you that historically are just completely accurate. Okay, so this song here is from 1902. That song is not from 1975 when The Sting came out. This song is from 1859 that I'm about to play, and that's what you would have heard when Isaias Hellman was coming into Los Angeles, as I should say. I promised you I'd say something about William Mulholland. We all know that Los Angeles doesn't have enough water, but William Mulholland was a municipal engineer, and I think somebody else would have come up with an aqueduct system to steal all the water from the Owens Valley. I don't think it had to be Mulholland. And Mulholland, we also know, didn't design another project very well, and it caused a great flood, killing tons of people in Ventura County along the road that is the back route called the 126. And so, I think he's important because the aqueduct had to happen. We needed more water. And the cities had their own water supplies, and Beverly Hills did for a long time. The water wasn't very good, but I don't know that I would put him in the same category as Isaias Hellman. I think that J. Griffith changes the city. I think the Chandlers are incredible boosters. I think they're into this whole thing where the land is being sold. There's westward expansion. Los Angeles is going to have culture. Los Angeles is going to be viewed as an important city. Their paper was what Los Angeles needed for that. And some of that time, the newspaper was the only thing. There was no TV, there was no radio, and Los Angeles Times was very important in making Los Angeles a world-class city. So, as you know, I am a real workplace lawyer. I am always hoping people call me if they have a real case where they've been fired from their job. Maybe they were sexually harassed, class actions where they're owed wages. I can be reached at 877-525-0700. That's 877 525-0700 during normal business hours, 9 to about 6:30. We're even taking calls these days. 877-525-0700. If you're anywhere in California, we have a lot of offices throughout California, not just in Los Angeles. I do hope you've enjoyed this show. As you know, we're not broadcasting live at any radio station right now because of the coronavirus. And we expect the show to move back into more of the live broadcast on an FM station once this coronavirus thing is over with. But this is not a time in which I'm able to produce a quality show with multiple voice actors and actresses, because we have to do those on Zoom and people have laggy internet, and it's just not the way to go. And these days, we're all doing our own cleaning, and I'm answering all the phones at the Employment Lawyers Group, and there's just less time to put together shows like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you didn't think it was too boring and specific about Los Angeles, but that is my hobby. I do encourage you to check out the vintage websites I maintain, such as vintagelosangeles.org or employeelaw, all one word, .com/vintage-LA. I have shared a lot of my rare images, maps, pictures, what I have, phone books, all kinds of things, and knowledge about Los Angeles, and what I think are the more interesting stories about Los Angeles. And when I do shows like this, I look at the Karl Gerber with the K channel on YouTube on those shows, and I do notice that people watch 40% or 100% of the show when it's about this sort of Los Angeles topic. So I know there is an audience for that, and it's hard to do because it is very factually specific, and if the show is black and white like tonight, where we're talking about things that happened 100 years ago or more, there are quite frankly less people interested in that kind of serious Los Angeles history. Most people want the color days where we've got color pictures and something kind of like within their lifetimes. Like there used to be swimming pool stores all over Ventura Boulevard in the 50s and 60s, or Marineland, or something that everyone knows used to be there that isn't there anymore, that's very exciting and they have fond memories. So that stuff I really get a kick out of. I really enjoy it, but it's just the interest in the hardcore historic facts is a little bit different, like what you've been hearing about tonight. So I hope you've enjoyed the show. This is the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show. I'm Karl Gerber. In real life, I do represent employees. This is episode 108. You should go back on the Karl Gerber with the K channel on YouTube, review old episodes, and I just want to make sure I'm keeping in touch with everyone until the show is regularly being broadcast live on radio in Los Angeles after the coronavirus is over with. And so again, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have a wonderful week of workplace abuse. But if you do, I think you know where to call.
Since 1993, the Employment Lawyers Group has been a results-oriented law firm whose goal is to get the client what they deserve. They've represented thousands of California employees who've lost their jobs, been sexually harassed, subjected to employment discrimination, or were owed wages on an individualized or group basis, such as a class action. They have a high rate of success. There are few situations involving employment law that they have not confronted. At the forefront of employee rights, they're often the first employee law firm to confront a new legal issue. For an experienced employment lawyer, call 877-525-0700. That's 877-525-0700. They have call takers standing by. Online, read more about the firm at employeelawca.com. They have offices throughout Southern California. Make your work problem theirs to solve.
Cut.